Hi everyone. It has been really a long time since my last video. Well, a lot of things is happening. It is good to continue our journey. So here we are, and welcome back. Well, in our last video, we talked about tag format painter. Essentially, it is reading an existing tag that we placed in the model and replicate the settings and propagate to all the other things. I'm coming here to reset the source and then select elements to be tagged. I can select a bunch of these desks, then go finish, create tag. It's going to match the look. See, like it's in the same relatively locations, in the same kind of leader types. I can continue run this, and as long as there is a source, just pick all these rest chairs and it will do the same. So that's our last video. If you're unfamiliar with that, go back to check the previous videos. The workflow is as follows. So I select the source tag, select a bunch of elements to tag. Using the source tag, extract the data, the type, the leader shapes, the leader locations, and write all of those to a txt files. So this can be operate between different Dynamo player runs, because Dynamo players, every time it's a new run, is going to purge all the old data. So I write to external txt files to retain these informations. Now, once we select the element and have all these data, use these data to propagate to those elements, and then create new tag and matching styles so that all of these tag, this is an element tag, is going to have the same kind of look. Now make it easier to repeat the same tag throughout multiple elements. Now that's previous. This time we're going to change this a little bit, and now talking about generic annotations and text note. Essentially do the same thing. Now we're going to select a bunch of elements and place generic annotations and text around them. It's the same workflow, just changing those tags into the other two 2D component. Well, let's see how this works. Remove all of these. It is rather a simple change, so I'm not going to warp everything into a Dynamo players. We're going to use Dynamo to demonstrate this. And here we go. Hopefully that's enough. So that's the major component. Here I have a bunch of Python script from annotations and target element, extract data, and then write to a txt file, read from that txt files, using this information and the elements to annotate to create annotation and match styles. So let's see how this works. I'm going to come here and place a annotation. This is a, let's say this is a number node. We're going to call this number 1. And hopefully it is on the sheet, has a line of text saying something. The same logic applies. I can create leaders like that. All I have to do is, because this is an annotation, this is not going to by default find the target, so we're going to select the target and the annotation. After we done that, let's turn this to automatic. It's going to similarly return all those data and in the form of essentially strings. Then we pick the element to annotate, and then just pass all of these to here. See, it create all of these generic annotations in the same relatively locations. Now that's quite straightforward. There is another options because by default tag you can't rotate a tag. There's no rotation to it. Like regardless of how I rotate, the text still reads straight. But for annotations, there's a way to rotate it. So we get these true or false settings to rotate the new tag annotation that we're going to create or not. If I go to false, it's going to look like that. You see, everything is reading straight. Still, like the text, the annotation is still horizontal. If I do true, see, like create a new one in there. Now this time it is rotating. Depending on what you need, you might choose whether to rotate or not. Personally, I like the rotated version, which is even though it might be the text may be rotated, it's still maintaining the same kind of relatively locations, so that's good. Now here we have the annotations, and then this one, it's the same setup, will be working for text. So if I go and say write something like this is desk, and then do a leader like that, we could do the same thing, text, target, and then element to text. Let's select these desks and then bring this in. See, it brings all this text. This is desk all the way over here. So that's the main thing we're going to talk today for this video, is doing the same thing that we did for the tag and making it possible for generic annotation categories and text category. Well, that's pretty much straightforward. And it's not too complicated. It's the same kind of structure. We already talked about that in the previous video, so feel free to look deep into that to see how I combined this workflow. There's only a couple things that is interesting and worth mentioning, so here we are doing that. First thing for text and annotations is that they can have multiple leaders. Although in our setup, the multiple leaders doesn't necessarily help, but by default, we can have multiple leaders. So I can bring additional leaders from these annotations, but when it comes to tag, it's always going to be 1. Therefore, we're going to change this script a little bit now, because you see, like here, it returns a list of 3 points. That's the leaders. If I remove 1, it's going to turn to 2. Like if I add another 1, it's going back to 3. This is the first thing to note. The text and annotations has multiple leaders? Well, this is where it comes. Using the Revit API docs, we can look at annotation symbol class and the method get leaders or add leaders. You see, like get leaders is going to return a collection of leaders. So the method you use get leaders is going to give you a list. Whereas if you use tag, let's see, tag class, independent tag, and properties has leader, is going to get one leader, and then leader and leader elbow is only going to return as a individual element. So let's go back. This time we're going to use the get leaders returns a list. The leader end and leader elbow always exist. In the dependent tag, sometimes you can have with leader end, you can go with free leader end or attached leader end, but for these things, it's always going to return that's the leader end, and then 7, 8, 9 is representing the leader elbow point. Basically, if I have 3 leaders and passing this through, all of them is going to have 3 leaders. Now, the second things to talk about is again, like we showed, the rotation. So symbol and text can rotate. Therefore, we're going to build the script to allow it to say rotate or don't rotate. See the don't rotate one, everything is going to read horizontal. But the rotate one, like when it comes to over here, this one has been rotated for 90 degrees. Now, rotation is a little bit interesting when it comes to consider how to make it rotate. Let's see, like for example over here, right? Like how many degrees to rotate that. Here is the essence. So the symbol's rotation is what we're going to feed in to every newly created annotations. The symbol's rotation equals the rotation of the element, in which case is this target element. So I want the desk and the annotation have the same relationship to the source, in which case the angle between the element and the annotation. So basically the symbol's rotation equals element rotation plus the element to symbol rotation. And because we want to maintain this value as the constant, therefore it looks the same from the source to any new created groups. So when we process the source, we go find the existing annotations rotation and find the existing targets rotation. Use that to get the element to symbol rotation. Use that as the constant. When it comes to create a new one, we have this constant from our target, and we get the desk's rotation. So we have the element rotation and the constant. We use that to calculate the symbol rotation and then rotate the symbol. The script to rotate the symbol will be rotate method. The Revit API looks for the element ID to rotate and then a axis and then a angle. If we take a closer look into the script, it's going to be over here. See, here is the extract the summaries. So in which case we have, where is it? Yeah, the degree is the annotation's x vector is the angle between the annotation's x vector versus the desk's x vector using the z-axis as the rotation axis to get that degree. And when rotating it down the line, it's going to be over here. So if we want to rotate it, we first get a line, and then the degree is first we get the angle between the view, the element rotation essentially. This is the element rotation, and use that constant from previous calculation to minus the degree of the element to get the rotation of the annotation essentially. And this is rotating that element. This is script we're rotating that element. So there's that. And the third thing to talk about, text styles. Yes. So when it comes to text, you know that there are more than just a simple string. This can be this can be edited the text style. For example, I can go bold, or I can add a dot to this, and we're going to say like this is desk. Place like with yellow stripes. Right, I can have multiple lines of text, and let's make this a little bit. This tab is really long. Tab size. Now that looks better. So for example, we can have multiple lines of text, and with a text format, we want the same thing to all the other ones. Therefore, we have to do something to that. If I pass this in, you can see like this is retaining. Well, because the angle elbow is a little bit weird there, but everything over here, you can see that the dot has been retained, the bold has been retained, so on and so forth. So that's another interesting thing about text. So there's text format. right? Basically, again, over here in the text note, the method to create a text note, I'm using particularly this one. So we're also retaining the width. And then the most important one is get formatted text. We'll return the text formatting, and then we use that as the source and set formatted text to all the other new text note that we're going to create. So we obtain the styles from here and then essentially push it to every new string that we generate in here. Now there's that, and last one is the instance parameters, because unlike tag, the symbols, the generic annotations, they are allowed to have instance parameters. Like this one says 0, 1. You can see that the newly created tag also has the 0, 1s. But say if I can come here and if I change this, I also want the same thing to happen to all the other ones I create. Oh yeah, right, it's this one. See, I changed that to 3. This one is all going to be 3 now. Therefore, we're passing the instance parameters. Now, the trick thing about instance parameters is that we can have an unknown amount of parameters and in an unknown amount of styles. So here I have a length, I have a number, apply number, and then I have a yes and no. Essentially, we want to pass everything and to make them exactly identical. That's the goal. Therefore, like over here, the one that I just created now has the 3 feet, number 5, and then the yes no parameter to be false, essentially. So we're going to, that's where these happens, the match annotation parameter values. Over here is actually collect all the parameters and try to set the same kind of parameter values to the newly created annotations. Now this is the fourth thing, the last thing that is worth mentioning is we're going to obtain as many parameters as possible and set it to them. It's the same thing for the text nodes. So for example, the text node, there is also these kind of parameters. The leaders can be arced. Then I can just create multiple leaders, making it looks like right, I can create something like a circle. But then if I pass that to the script, now the newly created ones will have the arc leaders. That will be checked as well. So it's the same logic. We're going to, that's the same thing, match text style parameter values and match annotation parameter values. Oh, this looks really weird. So we're going to set the parameter values. That's where I realized the biggest mistakes I made in the previous ones and continue to this one is when I realized that there is a unknown amount of parameters values and they have a unknown kind of unit. It doesn't work when I try to write all these parameters into text because when I read it back, a value 0.5 or 96, it's hard to know whether this is a length or a number or a text. So it is really, I should really realize that earlier that I don't really need to write all those data into text. All I need is to write that element ID to txt files, which is actually making it easier because here I have two comparisons. One is in Revit format and one is in text format. If I look at that and say this one reads tag, so tag, element to tag, and then if I read that, you see like when it's in Revit format, I can use point and family type and essentially true or false, yes or no. All of these either in Revit styles or in Dynamo styles, it's going to recognize that as point. But if I write that to strings, it's the same thing. We'll have to translate that into essentially point. The XYZ has to be separated. Otherwise, when I write that into strings, I have to treat this string to get rid of point, the x, the equal sign, and the parentheses and the commas to really get to that. And then it makes it harder to read. When I read it, I have to read that three values to reconstruct the point. In all reality, I just have to write the element ID to the text and then do all of these down the line when we are creating the tags in here, which will be a lot easier. And it will also allow me to, like here, I'm just extracting the parameter values and the parameter names and then set the same things. Now I don't need to do the unit transformations or translations when I have to write that into text. So that's something I'm going to change in the upcoming ones to only write element ID to txt so that I can run this script multiple times in the player, but making the style painter easier. But I can imagine that we're going to tag multiple element, the same element multiple times in one view. But it's hard to put a, for example, that's a number node or a sheet node or a text string on multiple of these tasks to have the same value multiple times. Therefore, we're going to have the next step, so edit the data flow, pass element ID to text only, and then talking about the real deal. So the next one we will talk about how I truly view how to use this script to essentially place the same text strings or generic annotations around multiple elements for multiple times. That's also why I didn't bring this into a player because this is not the final format of how I picture to use this script. This is just to demonstrate. Now we can do tag, annotations, and text. The next step will be really how this thing can be used in a true project scenarios or true drawing scenarios. So stay tuned and well, enjoy this one. Thank you. That will be all for today.